Welcome back to The Explainer. So forget the usual long introductions today, because we are jumping straight into a 400-year-old cold case. We're going back to 16th century Scotland to examine a crime scene, a political cover-up, and a piece of early propaganda that is still being sung today. I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind as we go. How exactly does a victim of a violent crime transform from just a man into this towering national symbol over the centuries? How do facts blur with rumors to create something entirely new? Well, to answer that, we have to look closely at our primary evidence, which is a traditional Scottish ballad.
Okay, let's dive into this. Let's start with the actual historical facts. In the year 1592, the highly popular Earl of Moray was murdered by his rival, the Earl of Huntly. And Moray was this incredibly well-liked nobleman, right? So his death didn't just cause a local stir, it triggered massive national outrage. But what we are analyzing today isn't some dry police report or a modern documentary. It is a ballad. It's a poem that literally preserves the folk memory of this event, capturing all the raw emotion of the Scottish people while blending the hard facts with some highly speculative history.
Part 1. Decoding the Scots language. The evidence. Now, before we investigate the text itself, we need to grab the right linguistic tools. Traditional Scottish ballads weren't written in the standardized English we're used to today. They were written in older forms of Scots, which differs from modern English primarily in pronunciation. Take the vowel sounds, for example. Instead of where, a Scots speaker would say war. Instead of long, they'd say lang, and instead of road, it's raid. Actually, hearing this older Scots read aloud is the key that unlocks the narrative here. You see, ballads were meant to be spoken or sung out loud, and understanding these phonetic shifts helps us catch the rhythm and the rhymes that the original 16th century audience would have heard.
And because ballads were part of an oral tradition, they relied heavily on sound. And when stories are passed down by ear, things can and do change. I mean, have you ever confidently belted out the wrong lyrics to a song, like thinking Taylor Swift was singing about Starbucks lovers? That's actually called a maundroghine, a misheard lyric. It's a great reminder that oral traditions and folk interpretations are totally fluid. They're shaped by the people singing them, which means they deal heavily in raw emotion and sometimes, as we're going to see, outright rumors.
Part 2. The crime scene and the victim. The investigation. First up, let's look at the really sophisticated framework holding this whole story together. The ballad is made up of stanzas, and each contains 3 quatrains, which are just 4-line sections. The rhyme scheme here is A, B, C, B. So Lowlands and Moray don't rhyme, but bin and green absolutely do. This alternate rhyme scheme provides a steady, rhythmic heartbeat to the poem. It acts as a powerful aid to memory for the folks who had to recite this entire thing by heart. All right, let's read these opening lines. Ye Highlands and ye Lowlands, O whar hae ye been? They have slain the Earl of Moray and laid him on the green. Now notice how that very first line acts as a dramatic call to the entire Scottish nation, both the Highlands and the Lowlands. It immediately situates us in Scotland, practically demanding the country's attention. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer efficiency of the ballad form. I mean, within just 4 lines, we know exactly what's happened. The verse throws us right into the visceral aftermath of the murder. We're confronted with this gruesome, unmoving image of the Earl's body laid out on the green. The crime scene is established instantly.
Then the second quatrain flashes back in time to profile the victim as he was in life. It reads, He was a braw gallant, and he rade at the ring, and the Bonnie Earl of Moray, he might have been a king.
I want to isolate a really specific piece of vocabulary here, braw gallant. The ballad doesn't just say Moray was a good guy, right? It paints him as a striking, physically attractive man overflowing with romantic and heroic qualities. He's the ultimate dashing hero in the eyes of the people. To further build up this hero, the poem uses some highly specific imagery. Rade at the ring refers to a noble equestrian sport, kind of like jousting, where noblemen on horseback tried to put a lance through a suspended ring, so it shows he was athletic and chivalrous. But then we get the line, he might have been a king. Historically speaking, not really. While his father-in-law had been a regent, Moray himself had virtually zero prospect of actually acceding to the throne. But the ballad deliberately exaggerates his regal qualities. Why do that? To emphasize his wasted potential and make the tragedy of his murder all the more poignant for the audience.
Part 3. Dramatic irony and betrayal. The suspects.
Now, the scene shifts to what is arguably the most heartbreaking aspect of the whole story. The historical seat of the Earl, Castle Dun. O lang will his lady look frae the castle down, ere she see the Earl of Moray come sounding through the town. Just picture Lady Moray looking down from the castle heights, desperately scanning the horizon for her husband.
Let's zoom in on a beautiful sensory detail in that quatrain, the word sounding. According to the Dictionary of the Scots language, this refers to the act of causing a musical instrument to emit sound, like ringing a bell or blowing a trumpet. So she isn't just looking for him, she is waiting to hear that triumphant musical herald signaling her dashing nobleman's safe return. So, the crucial point is the immense sympathy created here through dramatic irony. And dramatic irony happens when the audience knows something that the character in the story does not. We, the listeners, have already seen Moray's lifeless body laid out on the green back in the very first stanza. We know for a fact he is never coming home. Yet we have to sit there and watch his widow wait in vain. It pulls you emotionally into the tragedy in such a profound way.
But that sorrow quickly turns to anger as the prime suspect is finally named. Now wae be to ye, Huntly, and wherefore did ye say, I bade ye bring him with ye, and forbade ye him to slay? Notice the phrase, wae be to ye, Huntly. Woe be to you. Huntly is the rival and the killer. But wait, suddenly there is a mysterious I speaking in the poem. Who exactly is this I commanding the villainous Earl? We really have to unpack the incredible political intrigue happening right here. The person speaking, asserting their superiority over an earl, is none other than King James VI himself. In some printed versions, these lines are actually in quotation marks to show its reported speech. Historical accounts suggest the king had given Huntly a commission to apprehend Moray. So the ballad brilliantly inserts the king's testimony, where James VI insists he expressly forbade Huntly from slaying Moray. It essentially provides the king with a convenient royal alibi right smack in the middle of a folk song.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the ballad uses a technique called repetition with a difference. It perfectly mirrors the earlier stanza about Moray's gallantry, acting almost as a eulogy, but then it drops a massive scandal right at the end. Listen. He was a braw gallant, and he played at the glove, and the Bonnie Earl of Moray, he was the Queen's true love.
Let's take a look at the new details introduced here. Played at the glove refers to falconry, specifically the thick protective gloves worn for the sport. So, just like riding at the ring, this is another noble pastime symbolizing Moray's ultimate chivalry. But then, the ballad drops a complete bombshell. He was the Queen's true love. Now, is this true? Historically, there is virtually zero evidence of an illicit affair between the Earl and the Queen. But remember, ballads are poetry. They aren't documentary history. By blending these factual details with completely scandalous rumors, the song romanticizes Moray to the absolute maximum, which in turn vilifies his killers even more.
Part 4. The verdict. Why this ballad matters.
So why does this specific song matter? Well, first, it firmly anchors itself in conventional ballad themes. Ballads absolutely love to tell stories about battles, love, betrayal, and catastrophe. And here we have the ultimate catastrophe. A fallen, highly romanticized hero, a bitter betrayal by a rival, and a villain in the Earl of Huntly who, historically speaking, was never truly brought to justice for this murder. It presses literally all the emotional buttons of its audience.
Let's move on and see how this builds into something much larger than just a tragic song. By popularizing this specific, highly romanticized interpretation of events, the ballad ensured that the memory of the Earl of Moray survived. He became so much more than just a murdered man. He became a symbol of what Scotland might have had. It offered the people this tantalizing glimpse of an alternative political reality, perhaps a more just or virtuous leadership if only their braw gallant hadn't been killed. It united a nation in grief and outrage, essentially acting as a form of early emotional propaganda.
Which brings us to our final thought today. We've seen how a 16th century folk song took a real murder and layered it with exaggerated royal potential, dramatic irony, and scandalous rumors about the Queen, all to provoke a massive emotional response from the public. So how different is this 400-year-old ballad from the way we consume politically charged stories today? I mean, when we look at modern news, viral social media posts, or political propaganda, aren't we still seeing that exact same powerful blend of truth, rumor, and speculative history designed to capture our outrage? It's a fascinating connection to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me to decode this incredible piece of history in this explainer, and remember to keep analyzing the stories you're being told.